On behalf of the National Center for the Performing Arts, I extend a warm welcome to you all. And we are deeply honored by your presence. So thank you so much. At this moment, we would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our chairman, Mr. Khushru Santu, for his unwavering support and guidance granted for this event. Okay. Today, we have the privilege to explore the profound narrative encapsulated within the book titled as The Making of Exile, Sindhi Hindus and the Partition of India, authored by the esteemed Nandita Bhavnani. So, your big hand. So, little brief about the Nandita. So, Nandita Bhavnani, the author, whose extensive research has brought to light the often overlooked experiences of the Sindhi Hindu community during the chaotic era of partition. Here is a quick overview of Nandita. Nandita Bhavnani holds an MA Anthropology and is also qualified chartered accountant with a law degree. Since 1997, she has been deeply involved in extensive research on Sindhi culture and history. Her work includes conducting interviews with partition survivors in India, Pakistan, and UAE. Wow. Bhavnani is the author of several notable publications, including Sindhi Nama, which is published in the year of 2018, The Making of Exile, Sindhi Hindus and the Partition of India, in the year 2014, and I Will and I Can, the story of Jai Hind College, published in the year of 2011. Let's give a big hand again to our author. Moving forward, let's all join our hands and give a warm welcome to our moderator, Aruna Madnani, who will skillfully guide our discussion. Okay, Aruna Madnani is the founder and managing trustee of the Sindhi Culture Foundation, which is dedicated to researching and sharing Sindhi culture with a vision to preserve and promote Sindhi heritage. Madnani has been actively involved in various cultural initiatives. Once again, a very warm welcome to you, Aruna. Friends, once more, let's put our hands together to extend a hearty welcome to our talented panelist, Sifra Lentin. Sifra Lentin, whose insights will undoubtedly enhance our exploration and this important topic. About Sifra Lentin. Sifra is a respected author and journalist, known for her focus on socio-cultural perspectives. Her column, Vintage Mumbai in Midday, received widespread appreciation for its insightful portrayal of Mumbai's history and culture. So, welcome, Sifra. Also, we have delighted to announce that one more guest is here, a very talented Manjit Kripalani, the co-founder and executive director of Gateway House, Indian Council on Global Relations, will be joining us as a guest speaker to deliver the opening remarks for our event. So, with a distinguished background in global affairs, Mr. Kripalani has been instrumental in shaping discussions on international relations and policy formulation. Her insights and expertise promise to enrich our event and provide valuable perspectives on the topic at hand. Please join us extending a warm welcome to Ms. Manjit Kripalani. We are honored to have her with us and look forward to her illuminating remarks. So please welcome. Yeah. Before that, please welcome. Before that, we would like to honor our guest with lovely flowers as a symbol of our gratitude. This discussion promises to provide a unique and invaluable opportunity to gain insights into a lesser explored aspect of Indian history. We invite you all to actively participate, engage with a rich narrative woven by the author, and contribute to enriching dialogue. Once again, thank you for gracing us with your presence, and let us now begin our exploration into the making of exile, Sindhi Hindus and the partition of India. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, NCPA. This is such a thrill for our community to be here, to have our stories told by Nandita and people who are non-Sindhi, people like Sifra, who have been collecting these stories learned from our families, our parents, friends. So I'm really delighted here to be opening. Let me just say a very warm welcome to you all. And everyone's seen the bio data, but I'm going to give you the personal introduction to all these ladies. And nice to see all three ladies here. So my name is Manjeet Kripalani, and it really is a special pleasure to be here in this discussion on the Sindhi community and its separation from its homeland. I was born in Sindh. I'm probably the only person of my generation, very few, who were born in Sindh and then came over in the 1960s to India. So I've drunk the water of Sindh, Sindh ka pani, and it's really very sweet. Nandita, two of the three people here, we're all family friends. Nandita's parents and my parents and Bambi's parents and my parents have been friends for many, many, many years. Nandita, this book is, you are a true scholar, apart from being a trained anthropologist, to study this kind of displacement during the partition and later. Nandita reads, writes, and speaks Sindhi, and she understands all its nuances. I know because she's an editor for the Sindhi in my mother's upcoming anthology on Sindh. With 3 books, and they're going to all be out very soon. And Bambi, Bambi is really, we've known each other since we were children. Our fathers knew each other very well, and she then moved to Bangalore from Bombay, and then she is now friends with my cousins. So the family relationship continues, and she's really done a fantastic single-handed job of trying to get the Sindhi community back into focus. People think about partition and they only think about Punjab, but they don't realize that that the one state that was separated from Mother India is Sindh, and the Sindhis are here, though the state is not. So we've been deprived of our state patronage and therefore of our culture. Sifra Lenton is the Bombay History Fellow at Gateway House. She also comes from a community that has been very widely displaced, which is the Jewish community. Sifra is an expert on Indian overseas communities which have a large presence in Sindhi, and she has studied the displaced Sindhi, Sikh, and Jewish communities from today's Pakistan. She has contextualized their experiences in the global geopolitical churn, and we see so much of it happening now. So our experience of Sindh and the displacement is even more relevant today than it has been in the last few years, where borders are now being redrawn or they are being reintegrated. And so we must all hold out hope that maybe Sindh will return to its homeland. I'm sure this discussion will be rich and valuable for us all. So, Bambi.
Introduction. It is so lovely to reconnect. Thank you all for coming and welcome. Sindhi Culture Foundation researches and shares Sindhi culture. We have a YouTube series called Doorway to Sindh that has released 11 episodes of conversations with scholars on Sindhi history and culture. We have another 40 more in the works. So do look out for them. We are presently establishing a permanent gallery dedicated to the lost homeland of Sindh at the Partition Museum, Delhi. I welcome Nandita and Sifra. Thank you. Nandita, I find the title of your book, The Making of Exile, Sindhi Hindus and the Partition of India, resonating with the questions I think we all have. What happened? As journalist and freedom fighter Hiranand Karamchand Makijani says in his diary, how can I become an alien in my own country? What was really unique about the Sindhi experience of the partition was that Sindhi Hindus, by and large, experience much less violence, relatively speaking, as compared to other minority communities in India and Pakistan. Nandita, what do you think contributed to this?
So So thanks very much, Aruna, for having me here and for, spotlighting this book. It's a real honor and privilege. Thank you for that. Regarding the question that you just asked, why was there, relatively speaking, far less physical violence in Sindh? So, when I started this work in 97, I became part of this large group of researchers which was organized by Dr. Ashish Nandi in Delhi as part of the CSDS. And he had people working in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, working with Punjabis, Bengalis, Sindhis, Indian Muslims, all types of communities. And I was asked to research Sindhis. And the theme of the project was memory and violence, And when I went out to interview Sindhis that was my mandate, to interview Sindhis who had experienced or witnessed violence during partition. And to my great surprise, I could not find any. There were hardly any who had actually experienced it themselves or even who had witnessed it, And then in the course of my research, I found that there had been very little violence in Sindh, and the little violence that did happen, which happened in two pogroms, one in Hyderabad on December 17, 1947, which is a good 5 months after partition, after 15th of August. And there were about some 30-40 Hindus killed, and this was followed by another much larger pogrom in Karachi on the 6th of January in 1948. Now, it was these two pogroms that inspired the bulk of the Sindhi Hindus to migrate to India. But at the same time, there were mainly only these two large events. There were also other smaller events which had happened. There was a train attacked just outside Nawab Shah, and there was some violence near the town of Nawab Shah. But this was just soon after partition, and the number of fatalities was much low. So I began to wonder, why did this happen? And when I was looking through the newspapers of that time, I repeatedly came across mentions by the chief minister of Sindh at that time, who was Muhammad Ayub Khoro, saying, we want to maintain peace, we want to maintain peace, We want to maintain law and order. So I think that did play a big role, and I'll come back to this theme later. When I spoke to various people, they claimed that Sindhis are very peace-loving, that there's a lot of Sufi culture in Sindh, and this is true. This is true. However, when I dug even further, I found that the kind of violence that we saw in other areas of northern India, the subcontinent, like Punjab or Bengal, or even parts of UP, Delhi, and so on, and frankly, even communal violence, like the violence that happened in Gujarat in 2002, the same kind of violence happened in Sindh, but much earlier. It happened in November 1939, when there were a couple of buildings in the town of Sakhar called Manzilgah. And this Manzilgah was basically, it was the Muslim version of the Babri Masjid. So the Muslim League was looking for a political tool to galvanize themselves, to galvanize the Sindhi Muslim public. And they focused on this. They said, we want these buildings back, we want to reclaim these buildings. And it became such a large and such a polarizing movement that it ended up in communal violence. Now I want to talk a little bit about this communal violence that happened in Manzilgah. It was probably the single largest episode of communal violence in Sindh, okay? And we had about 160 odd people murdered, killed, burnt alive, okay? The bulk of whom were Hindus. About another 70 who were injured. 164 houses burnt, houses and shops. 467 houses looted, okay? 6 Hindu women abducted and raped, okay? Now, in this violence, we see a lot of features that occur in other types of communal violence elsewhere, okay? So here we see the police were highly complicit. They were largely Muslim, and they turned a blind eye to what was happening. In fact, many crimes happened within 400 meters of Sakhar City police station, but no action was taken. In the countryside, where Hindus were much more in a minority, the violence was much worse, okay? There was one incident where a pregnant woman, her belly was cut open, her child was killed in front of her, and then she was killed. okay? And two senior Sindhi Congress leaders, that is Dr. Choitram Gidwani and Professor Ghansham Jethanand, and they were financed, they were sent or they chose to go on a research trip, a fact-finding mission, and they were financed, as it happened, this is just an interesting aside, they were financed by two Sindhi tycoons. One was Hasaram Rijumal, and the other was Kishan Chelaram, the founders of HR and KC College today, you know. So they were also financed by the merchants of Sakhar and Shikarpur, and we have, you know, a long history of philanthropy there as well. So they found, when they went to the countryside, they found houses where the Hindus had been massacred. There were bloodstains on the floors, on the walls, even on the ceilings, okay? So why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this, there's one more very important point that I should mention. At the same time, there were also Muslim zamindars or Muslim jagirdars who protected Hindus, okay? So there were instances of those as well. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this to show that, yes, there was a Sufi culture in Sindh, but human beings are human beings, and we are all prone to some degree of violence. And this violence existed in Sindh too. And the connection with partition is that I personally feel that because there had been such a high level of violence, the Sindhi politicians, they have gone on record to say they regretted the fact that they instigated this. And when it came to partition, partition happened just 8 years later. So this was very much alive in public memory. And I think there was a degree of regret, there was a degree of remorse, and that played a role in preventing violence in Sindh. And like I said, the Sufi culture of humanism, that also played a role. Khoro, at that time, one thing we also should remember is that Karachi was the capital of Pakistan. You know, we are so used to thinking of Islamabad today. But in those days, that was the first capital. And with this competition that was going on between India and Pakistan, which began right from inception, Khoro felt that Delhi, which had such great riots and such violence, he wanted to show Karachi in a more positive light. The capital of Pakistan versus the capital of India. So that was another motive for him to keep Karachi safe. And he tried his best, but at the end of the day, there's only so much the government or the state can do. And finally, it was the incoming Muhajirs who engineered the riots so as to make the Sindhi Hindus leave. The lesson here that I can take from this is that, yes, human beings are human beings, and we are all capable of some degree of violence, some degree or the other. But it's very easy for Sindhi Hindus to look back and feel terrible about what happened to their brethren, to their families, to their community, you know. But this can always happen to any minority. And we have seen that happen in so many other parts of not only the subcontinent, but also the world, you know. What happens to a minority? What happens when you are outnumbered? And what happens then, I feel, as a majority, that this is what we need to think about. What can we do to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again? So that's my takeaway from it.
Thank you, Nandita. Sifra, from your research, where there were other communities that were relatively unscathed by the violence of partition, were there other communities?
So firstly, before I begin, I'd like to thank you, Aruna, for having me, and for Nandita, who's an old friend. We've been talking on and off through the years. We have an overlapping interest, Nandita and I, because I belong to the Ben Israel community, and we had a fairly large presence in Karachi. In fact, my mother belongs to the Karachi Jewish community. And I'm coming out with a chapter very soon in a book that is going to talk about the Jews of West Pakistan and East Pakistan. So I have been touching base with Nandita. I said, what are the overlapping things between our two communities? And in the course of writing for Gateway House, I also studied the Hazara Sikh community, a little bit of the interviews on partition with the Parsi community in Karachi, presently who are there, and also the Goan Christians. So, coming back to whether our communities were unscathed, the Ben Israel community in particular, and the Jewish community in Karachi and in Sindh, did not suffer any kind of violence, because I did quite a lot of interviews, and one of the reasons was that one, the community is very small. We were just around 1,082 in Karachi city proper, and a little over 1,000 in the rest of Sindh. The community was largely a professional community working for the government. So there was a gentleman who was the head civil engineer or mechanical engineer of Karachi Port Trust. And there were a lot of Jews, Ben Israel Jews, working for the Karachi Port Trust, and they helped the Jews take the sea route to India, or largely to Bombay. So coming by the sea route actually saved a lot of them. And as Nandita rightly mentioned, not all of them left immediately. We had a community existing in Karachi till 1970, because our synagogue, the Magen Shalom synagogue, actually they sort of filed returns or accounts till 71. And of course, those accounts and papers are with the British Library. I haven't accessed them, but I saw them online. I was told to look at them. But the fact that that was the last year actually marked the demise of our community. There is talk about a few Jews being underground, but that's not been verified. So coming back is, by and large, the Jewish community was unscathed because they came to India by the sea route. And those who stayed on till the late 1960s, in fact, most of them left by the 1967 Arab-Israeli war, and they used the Pakistan, Iran, Tehran, Tel Aviv route. That means they flew El Al from Tehran to Israel. So that was one part of it. The few Jews who were in the Punjab and in Northwest Frontier Province, which is Khyber Pakhtunkhwa today, did witness the violence. I haven't met an interviewee yet to really corroborate this, but there were some interviews that said that those Jews in Punjab, in Lahore in particular, in Peshawar, they came down to Karachi and then took the ship out. So that is as far as the Jewish community is concerned. The Sikh community, most of the Punjabis who did the land border crossing suffered the violence. And unfortunately, I haven't explored this too much. There were two of my interviewees, one is my neighbor who's now 103 years old, who came as a young woman of 24. She witnessed this violence, and she said the train in front of them, everyone was killed on that train. And she wept when I talked to her about this. And there was another gentleman, Punjabi. But interestingly, and this is really unique, we have a community of Sikhs and Punjabis from a province called Hazara. And Hazara is in the Northwest Frontier Province. This entire community uprooted themselves overnight, took the frontier mail, and came straight into India. So they did not witness any violence, and they have settled here in Mumbai. A few of them went up to Kashmir because of Ranjit Singh's kingdom. There was a community in Kashmir. So some of them joined the Kashmir community, and some came down straight to Mumbai. And they have formed themselves in GTB Nagar, in Chunabati, which they have the Hazara society. So as far as I'm concerned, the communities I have interviewed and know about have largely avoided the violence, or were lucky enough to really avoid it.
Nandita, what were the ramifications of Sindhi Hindus experiencing relatively less violence?
Yeah, so this is also interesting because, what happened was that everywhere else, in the northern part of the subcontinent, except for, like Sifra mentioned, these very small sub-communities like Jews or Goan Christians and so on, Apart from that, major groups of minorities, major communities, were all subject to great high levels of violence, as we all know. And that led to a very, this huge level of migration, again, which is very well known, okay? But in Sindh, because there was no violence, because the Chief Minister Khoro maintained law and order to a large extent, and because Sindhis were also part of the administration, the bureaucracy, they were part of trade, he was keen to keep them on. So as a result of all that, the bulk of Sindhi Hindus did not migrate in 1947, at the time of partition at least, okay? There were some families who saw the writing on the wall, and they sent their women and children, their aged people to India earlier, or they migrated themselves. But by and large, the bulk of the Sindhi Hindu community in Sindh did not migrate, which meant that they were the largest minority in at least West Pakistan. There was something similar happening with Bengali Hindus in East Pakistan, but I won't touch on that right now. So Sindhi Hindus remained the largest minority for a good 6 months or so. And not just then, even till today, if you look at the largest minority community in Sindh, it is the Sindhi Hindus. And that happened because of that absence of violence, okay? Now, the second ramification is that because they were the largest minority community, and since in those days, the atmosphere everywhere in the entire northern subcontinent was so communally charged. You know, if you were a Hindu, then a Muslim was automatically an enemy. And similarly for Sikhs. And for Muslims, the Hindus and Sikhs were again automatically enemies. They were looked at with at least suspicion for the majority. There were a few, I would say, minority of people who had a more humanistic approach and saw them merely as human beings. But by and large, things were very polarized back then. So as a result of that, with the Sindhi Hindus being the largest minority in Pakistan, West Pakistan, they were the main targets of communal harassment and communal discrimination. Now this took many forms, you know, whether they were being harassed by Muhajirs who forcibly took over their properties, their houses, their offices and so on, their shops, or whether even from the government, whether it was the state government or the central government, there were, their houses were requisitioned, which was just, you know, a formal and a government version of what the Muhajirs were doing, you know. So there were various forms of discrimination, and let me also point out that there was some level of discrimination happening in India. Perhaps less so, but it was also happening here, okay. And it was also happening in East Pakistan. So again, you have this discrimination and the Sindhi Hindus bearing the brunt of it. Finally, we have the two pogroms of Hyderabad and Karachi in December and January, December 47, January 48. So when the Sindhi Hindus had experienced such a high level of discrimination for so long, when there was so much fear, so much insecurity, and there was a kind of a nervous peace in Sindh. So when these pogroms happened, it was like a warning bell. It was like an alarm bell. And that really triggered the exodus of the bulk of Sindhi Hindus to India. But when they came here, because this is the third ramification, because there had been such little violence, they were perceived as cowards by the larger Indian population. And they were looked down upon. They were told, Morarji Desai was telling the founders of Jai Hind College, why are you here? You should go back. You know, this is on record. You know, and T.M. Advani, who was the founder principal, he argued back with him. He said, you have no idea of what we have gone through. So this perception became prevalent in Indian society that Sindhis are cowards because there was no violence. Why did they come? There was no understanding or appreciation or sensitivity to the discrimination that they had experienced, or the fear, or the climate of fear that they had been living with. Okay? And unfortunately, then this comes to the fourth ramification in a sense, that because there was this negative perception, this is one of the reasons for the negative perceptions of Sindhis in Indian society, that generation, especially those who were children at that time, children, teenagers, they internalized this and chose to sideline their Sindhi identity, you know. they chose to merge with the, become sort of a, more of an Indian than an ethnic identity. Okay, and in the bargain, that contributed, well, one of the reasons of contributing to the sidelining of Sindhi culture in India today, among the Sindhi community. So you can see how it's had far-reaching effects.
I just want to add that other minorities also, we didn't go completely unscathed, because when Nandita mentioned the riots in 1948 in Karachi, they were important for two things. There are two different experiences here. Now, as far as the Jewish community is concerned, the Jews never faced any form of anti-Semitism. The partition problem was perceived as largely being a Hindu and Muslim sort of problem issue. So the Jews, the Parsis, the Goans were actually outside that issue. What happened was that in November 1947, the UN voted for the partition of mandated Palestine and the formation of a Jewish homeland. And what was happening in Pakistan, in Karachi at that time, was suddenly the community there was equated as being sympathetic to the Zionist cause. So they were actually largely persecuted. They had the same issues, but largely the issue, the violence against them. For example, during the Karachi riots, as Nandita mentioned it, the synagogue was ransacked. But a lot of the interviewees told me, I mean, one of them who was a young woman at the time, she in fact got married in the Karachi synagogue, she said, we had very good relations with the administration of the city and with the police commissioner. So they would send the police force immediately to protect our synagogue, to protect our homes. So, but again, there were nuances there. The families that left early and immediately, almost immediately on partition, or soon after the Karachi riots, which were a trigger, were the ones who had young daughters. That was very, very clear. Anyone who had young daughters left immediately. Another thing that happened, which not a lot of people are aware of, was while researching, I found that the borders were largely porous. People could come and go to and fro. For example, my grandfather worked for the Karachi Electricity Company. He was an accountant there. So he came here, he had 4 daughters. So he came and dropped them all here in India and 2 sons. He came and dropped his wife and children here in Mumbai. And they eventually settled in Pune and then went on to Ahmedabad. But he kept going to and fro to Karachi because he had a job there, and only returned in 1952, 4 years later, after passports were introduced. So not a lot of us realized that how easy it was to even travel, although there was a border, easy to travel between Bombay and Karachi to go visit your family or continue with your job and then come. But once the hard borders were instated with passports, everything was sort of properly partitioned in that sense. So I wouldn't say, yes, even the minority communities, whether the Parsis, whether the Parsis and Goans, not so much. Goans were viewed more as being of Portuguese descent, and they came to and fro, and they had a strong presence in Sindh. But the Jews, because of this Israel issue, were collated to being Zionists. So they had a different issue altogether.
Thank you. I've seen a passport that says for both, for the Republic of Pakistan and India. It's a joint passport. For a while, for I think till 52, I think, yeah. I'm forgetting, yeah. It actually, they held a joint passport and they could go back and forth. That was quite fascinating for me. It's actually, I think there's a copy of it at the Partition Museum in Delhi. Thank you. So quite right, Nandita, because I remember reading in your book about how Gandhiji said it was killing by inches. You know, the fear that just
The discrimination, communal discrimination, yes.
led to so much fear. Um, so Nandita, the title of the book, Making of Exile, how does the exile of Sindhis from their homeland compare to that of other communities like Jews, Tibetans, and Parsis that we've been just speaking about? You know, so I probably have an overlap here.
Yeah, yeah.
But,
No, this will be interesting
yeah,
for both of us
what
to
do you
talk about.
Yeah.
I will let Nandita
Yeah.
take the question first.
Yeah. So, the way I see it is that if you look at, for example, Tibetans or Jews or Parsis, they have very strong ethnic identities. Okay, now Sindhi Hindus also do, but if you look at Sindhi Hindus in India, and even those who have migrated from India, you know, to the rest of the world, the diaspora, um, everybody is talking about the decline of Sindhi, of the Sindhi language or the dilution of Sindhi culture. And you have many Sindhis, and I would include myself. I started out not knowing the Sindhi language. I started out not knowing anything about my history or my culture. And I know there are many other people who are like me, you know. So we do have that. And that I see in stark contrast to, say, Tibetans or Jews or Parsis, you know. And I've been thinking about this for a long time. You know, what caused the difference? And the main difference I can see is that in the case of the Tibetans or the Jews or the Parsis, what was their main motivation for their exodus, for their leaving their homeland? It was their religion, right? And they were a minority in their homeland. They were persecuted for their religion, and they moved to another country, to another land, where they continued to be a minority. Okay? And because their religion was their main reason for leaving, that was their identity, and they continue to foster that identity, they continue to maintain it. So in all three cases, you see that. Now with Sindhi Hindus, something very interesting happened. That yes, they were a minority in Pakistan. They were persecuted because of their religion, and they migrated for that reason. But when they came to India, they were no longer a minority in terms of religion. They were, India is a Hindu majority country. It was back then in 1947 as well. Okay, so there was, in a sense, they didn't have a separate identity to maintain in that sense. And the other interesting thing that happened was that there are many aspects of Sindhi culture. For example, the traditional Sindhi script in 1947 was the Sindhi Arabic script. Okay, now that had Muslim overtones. Sindhi Hindu women they didn't wear saris, most of them, the traditional women. They wore suthan cholo, or they wore a ravo, you know, with a pado, you know, which is a skirt. Now these, and they would not wear bindis. It was not part of their practice. So when these women settled in Gujarat or in Maharashtra or, you know, Western India, they were seen, this is like, especially the suthan cholo, that was seen as like quasi-Muslim dress. Or their belief in Sufi peers, you know. Or Sindhis eat non-veg. You know, many Sindhi families eat non-veg. They're not these strict vegetarians like Gujus are or Marwadis are, you know. That was also seen as a quasi-Muslim aspect. So like these, there were these quasi-Muslim aspects perceived. You know, this was perceived to be the quality of Sindhis. So in order to gain acceptance, they actually became more Hindu. I've known people I've met individuals who have told me that they stopped eating meat because otherwise their neighbors, their Gujarati Hindu neighbors would not play with them, you know, as children, for example. Or, well, I think also being surrounded by, as a minority or being surrounded by a majority community, you take to other habits. Now the Suthan Cholo has vanished. It comes back, you know, as like palazzos or stuff like that, but it's not perceived as Sindhi, you know. So these kind of, and the Sindhi Arabic script has declined. How many of us know it today, you know? So these aspects have all declined, and the Sindhis, in order to gain acceptance, have moved away from their Sindhi culture, which was perceived as quasi-Muslim, and moved towards a more mainstream, more Hindu culture. you know, and in the bargain, diluting their own cultural identity.
So, of course, you've posed a tough question, Aruna. Okay, coming back to the Jews, as you all know that till the formation of Israel in May 1948, the Jews lived as diasporic communities all over the world. Now, the community I belong to, we came to India almost 1,600 years ago. And we maintained our identity through our Jewish practices, like we ate kosher food, we observed the festivals. We had come earlier before the destruction of the Second Temple, so we were not aware of certain new festivals. But we were sort of brought into mainstream Judaism with what are called the Geniza traders of the Middle Ages who came to the west coast of India. Now, it's interesting because with the formation of Israel, initially Zionism was akin to a form of socialism where they wanted Jews to make aliyah, to settle down, and there would be an Israeli identity. But today, they find that coming back to their cultural identity is more important. So, in fact, after almost over 70 years, 75 years of Israel being in existence, all the communities from different parts of the world are rediscovering their cultural identity and roots from the countries they once belonged to. So, in fact, my community is going to soon set up an Indian Jewish museum. The Baghdadi Jews who came as traders to India have, along with Baghdadi Jews from other parts of the world, formed a Baghdadi museum. So I wouldn't say we had also adapted to the countries that hosted us. There was a certain amount of, I wouldn't say dilution, we followed the same religion. But for example, my community speaks Marathi. And traditionally, the women in the 19th century wore a Nawari sari, that is in like the Maharashtrians. So every community reacted accordingly. We were minorities wherever we are in different parts of the world. Of course, today it's just in Israel that we are a majority community. But in India, I feel that diasporic experience has actually, in Israel, playing an important role in strengthening the Jewish identity. So, of course, you all don't have that advantage. So it's worked, but it's been a long, well, we've been displaced for many, many centuries, I would say. As regards the Parsis, I think, yes, you're right. They are quite traditional. I'm married to a Parsi. I haven't studied their history that closely, but what I know about living in a Parsi household is that they are very conscious about their identity. And today, even the Iranians are aware about their Zoroastrian roots. They may be Shia Muslims, but they are aware that culturally they have Zoroastrian roots. And in fact, during the 19th century, a lot of Parsis from Bombay took a keen interest in traveling to Iran and setting up institutions in southern Iran, especially in Fars, where they had come from, for the benefit of the poor indigenous Zoroastrians there, because there are still Zoroastrians in Iran, and incidentally also Jews in Iran. Oh. Yeah. So, of course, living as part of the community, but a sizable number of them. So I would say that every community has to adapt to the circumstances they're thrown into, but they all adapt by maintaining a certain core identity. At least that has been my experience.
Thank you, Sifra. Yes, we are all the same, aren't we? I would like to now throw questions open to the floor, if any of you have some questions for Nandita or Sifra.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Most enlightening and insightful from all of you. Thank you. I'm coming at this whole issue from a very different axis. When we say culture and the propagation of culture or the retention of it as time goes by, let's say food, for example, food. Now, Punjabis also came here, and then, of course, there's the whole story of how they set up dhabas, and there's veg and non-veg Punjabi cuisine is now available all the way to Lakshadweep and Kanyakumari. And that's the same also with the Tibetans. Momos are at every street corner. So I wanted to just know if the Sindhis did anything of that sort with their food, because it's excellent food, but I can't get it anywhere except with the Sindhi family if I invite myself to their house. Otherwise, there's just no way, because it's the best way to propagate that culture, other than it's a soft power rather.
Yeah, so we do have examples of Sindhi eateries in Bombay. Like the most famous one is Kailash Parbat. Yeah, and he started out by selling. Actually, Manjeet Kripalani, who was here, who gave the introduction, her father told me this anecdote that when he was a medical student in Karachi before partition, he would. He was in, I think, in a hostel in Karachi, and every Sunday this guy would come and he would sell whatever, chaat, pani puri, whatever it was, bhel puri, I forget. And when he had made his target for the day, 15 rupees for whatever it was, because at that time things were sold in annas, right? So when he had met his target for the day, he would pack up and leave. He was not interested in hanging around, And her father, who was Dr. Nari Kripalani, he came here and was studying in Bombay. And he saw this same man after partition selling chaat outside Xavier's College, opposite Xavier's College. And he said, I've seen you before, And he said, didn't you used to sell chaat outside DJ Sindh College in Karachi? And he said, yes, I'm the same man. And later he found the same man who was the owner of Kailash Parbat, okay, which is now a very well-known restaurant with branches everywhere and even a hotel in Khandala. And you have other thing, I think, what is it, Bhagat Tarachand, yeah, in Chembur and so on. And you have Chembur, yeah, Chembur can. But I will also say this, that one of the reasons that Sindhis, especially in the early years, now it's a different story, but especially in the early years, why Sindhis did not take to this kind of a line much, was that it was looked down upon. To be a restaurant owner was looked down upon. It was at least within the Sindhi community, So possibly that's why it's not become so popular, although as there are plenty of non-Sindhis like you who love to eat Sindhi food and, will order it. There are a few places where you can order it, or they'll go to their Sindhi friends' houses, yeah. Yeah, very limited. That is true. That is true.
Too few for my liking, but thank you. Thank you.
We have time for one last question.
This gentleman here. Gentleman here. He's just bringing the mic. Yeah.
We'll get some Sindhi food this evening, though.
Yes, that's right. Thanks to Aruna.
See, good evening, madam.
Good evening.
My name is Arjun Hinduja. See, when we came from, during partition, I was only 5 years old. And a lot has been told to me by my parents, my father. My father started business in Mumbai. And as you rightly said, that Muraji Desai said, okay, why don't you go back? And you are not wanted here. Similarly, my father used to tell me that when he started business, and nobody used to trust him. Particularly, we were in electrical business, and he started a small shop where he would tell them that you give me the goods, I'm giving you the check first. When you realize the check, then you deliver it after 2 days. This was the status of refugees, Sindhi refugees. And we suffered a lot, according to my father, we suffered a lot for at least about 7 years after 47. We picked up after 1954. And to tell you today Sindhis are the highest Sindhi group, Sindhi community is the highest income tax payers in India. Do you know the percentage? Do you know the percentage? two years back, in 2 years, that is in 22-23 assessment, Sindhis have paid 24% of India's income tax. It is there in the, it is there in the, on the internet. I can send you a copy of it.
Lovely. I would appreciate
Yeah.
that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very
And
much, sir.
today, I'm really happy that we have suffered and we are doing well.
Yes, I think the Sindhis have really been known. The one thing that that they have excelled in after partition has been their spirit of resilience, you know. And I would say that applies more to the older generation, but that is something that we can be inspired by and we can apply in our own lives.
I believe quite some time back when Nehru was in power, he had offered L.K. Advani Kutch for Sindhis, and he refused the offer being too small. Is that right?
So, you know, I don't think L.K. Advani may have been so active back then. Maybe the offer was to someone else. But the fact remains that Bhai Pratap, D.L. Das, who was a Bhaiband tycoon, he tried to set up a Sindhi homeland in Kutch, in Gandhidham Adipur, okay, with the port of Kandla, yeah. And even that it was spearheaded by the Sindhu Resettlement Corporation. And many Sindhis, in fact, did move there, but they were largely from the lower middle class background, okay? Because the middle class or upper middle class Sindhis chose not to migrate. They were, by then already, they were comfortable in their, wherever they had resettled in India, number one. And number two, Kandla and Gandhidham were seen as like, you know, the back of beyond. They didn't want to move there either. So the people who moved there were of two types, mainly those who had not been able to resettle, or those who were very inspired and very enthused by the idea of a Sindhi homeland. But this whole idea of a Sindhi homeland never really took off, okay? Even though land was given, even though places were built. I mean, it didn't take off in, what I mean by that is that people, Sindhis living in Bombay or Bangalore or Delhi, they are not going to consider Gandhidham their homeland, you know? The circumstances are different now, number one. And also over the years, Sindhis have moved there and they moved out. But Gandhidham, like other Sindhi majority townships, like you have Bairagad in Bhopal or you have Ulhasnagar Kalyan, you know, on the outskirts of Bombay. So Gandhidham is very interesting. I was there about a year, about a year and a half ago, and I've been there several times. Gandhidham is one of the few places where you can hear Sindhi on the street. Where you go to a mochi, you can talk to him in Sindhi. Where I had an auto driver with whom I was speaking with in Sindhi, and mind you, he was not even Sindhi. He was a Gujarati who had grown up in a Sindhi neighborhood. He had learned Sindhi from an early age, and I was able to talk to him in Sindhi, and it was an amazing experience, you know. So yes, I mean, to that extent, yes. There are a lot of Sindhi philanthropic institutions there, a lot of other institutions like educational and medical institutions. So yes, all that. And yeah, many, many colleges also set up by the Tolani Trust. But Sindhi food you get everywhere. Wherever there are Sindhis, you'll find Sindhi food. Yes, Gandhidham also, but you go to Kalyan also, you'll go to, you know, so Pimpri you'll get, yeah. So I'm sorry, I think, I don't
Thank you. Huh? Thank you, everybody. We're all going to get our Sindhi food right now.
Lovely.
So thank you again for reviving the Sindhi Hindu experience of partition. This will play a crucial role in our self-reflection and create a path of reconstruction of our Sindhiness. Our museum that is going to be opening somewhere in April, and we will inform you as it is ready, will be the first to reflect the Sindhi lost homeland of Sindh. And we do invite you and we'll keep you posted.
So I'd like to applaud you, Aruna, because I know how many years you've been working on this project. She's really been at it, and I really admire her dedication. And it's going to be quite a stunning museum, thanks to the pieces she's been able to organize. So I really heartily recommend Not in Amritsar. There is a small bit devoted to Sindhis, but this one is in Delhi, and it's a much larger section devoted entirely to Sindhis.
And it's really a team effort. It's not possible without scholars like Nandita, Sasa Agarwal, Rita Kothari, Subhadra Anand, Mohan Gyani, and many others that have contributed to making it a sound museum. We thank National Council for the promotion of Sindhi language, Embassy Group, and our patrons. We thank very much the NCPA, Chairman K.N. Santuk, and the committee members. Sujata Jadhav, the head of Libraries and Documentation Center, who has organized our event today. Mr. Nayan Kale and his team, of the technical team. Mr. Ashwan Jyoti and his sound department team. Faraz Irani for the administration, remarkable administration. Mr. Albert Almeida for the marketing and PR. Mr. Nasha Dubash and Delzad Inspector for the social media. Mr. Gaude and his team for the stage setup. Hutuksi Bilamoria, Komal Nakul, and Chandu Library Department. Our Sindhi Culture Foundation team of Tara Dillon and Aniket. Thank you.
अजब उतर पार दे ताड़े की तवार अजब उतर पार दे ताड़े की तवार हारन हर संभारा मुझा सरिया संगार अजब मुझे यार वसन गावे सकिया अजब उतर पार दे ओ अजब उतर पार दे ककर तो कार करे अजब उतर पार दे ककर तो कार करे वसे तो वड पुड़ियो कालक खंड भरे विजण निशान वरे मुझ सकार सुख दिए हो तो के सिंधड़ी सारे हो तो के सिंधड़ी सारे